Welcome back to science class. And this week we will be discussing genetics. My name is Miss Rillieux, and if you joined me last week, we discussed the types of reproduction. So before we get into this week's lesson on genetics, let's review what we did last week. So for today's warm-up, we are going to play a little bit of a Jeopardy game just to make sure that we remember what we learned last week in preparation for our STAR assessment, which we will be taking in May. So there are several categories, and I'm just going to pick a random one. So we'll start with asexual. And the question I have for you, how many parents are needed for asexual reproduction to occur? Only one parent is needed. Very good. Let's talk about sexual reproduction. So the question is, how many parents are needed for sexual reproduction? Correct again. You said 2 parents, 1 male and 1 female are needed. Let's talk about sexual reproduction for 200. Are the offspring exactly the same or different from the parents? And why? Yes, because there are 2 parents, the offspring are different because they get characteristics from their father and from their mother. We can continue with sexual reproduction for 300. What is fertilization? Yes, it is when the male cell joins with the female cell to create a new organism. Sexual reproduction for 400. What is the difference between internal fertilization and external fertilization? Internal fertilization obviously happens inside of the body, whereas external fertilization happens outside the body. Let's go to asexual for 200. Are the daughter cells exactly the same as or different from the parent cells? And remember, we're talking about asexual reproduction. Right. They are exactly the same because it's just one parent. So that parent transfers 100% of their genes to the offspring. Asexual reproduction for 300. Name the 4 types of asexual reproduction. Correct again. There are binary fission, budding, regeneration, and fragmentation. Asexual reproduction for 400. What type of asexual reproduction do most bacteria use? Now remember, bacteria are really, really small, microscopic. So what type of reproduction do you think they use? Yes, they use binary fission. So they kind of just split apart. What about advantages? So advantages for 100. Name of the advantage of asexual reproduction. Absolutely. One big advantage of asexual reproduction is it only needs 1 parent. So because it only needs 1 parent, it happens very quickly. And if successful, it will require just a little bit of energy and a little bit of time. What about advantages for 200? Name an advantage of sexual reproduction. Right again. An advantage of sexual reproduction is variation. So because they do not have the same genes, that'll help organisms survive in new environments and help protect an entire population from being killed by a disease. Advantages for 300. What type of reproduction can occur very quickly? Is it asexual or sexual reproduction? Yes, it is asexual reproduction because they do not have to find a mate. Advantages for 400. What type of reproduction creates organisms with lots of variations? Is it asexual or sexual? And then also, can you tell me why? Perfect. It is sexual reproduction. And it's because they get genes from both parents and not just one. What about disadvantages for 100? Name a disadvantage of asexual reproduction. Right. A disadvantage of asexual reproduction is the lack of variation. So the organisms, they're more susceptible to disease because they cannot adapt to their new environment as well as an organism who reproduces sexually. Disadvantages for 200. Name a disadvantage of asexual reproduction. Yes, a disadvantage of sexual reproduction is organisms take a long time because they have to go out and find a mate. It takes two parents. Disadvantages for 300. What type of reproduction takes more time and energy, and why? Is it asexual or sexual? Absolutely. It is sexual reproduction because they have to find a mate. They also have to wait for their cells to mature. Disadvantages for 400. What type of reproduction lacks variation? Is it asexual or sexual? Correct again. It is asexual reproduction because the cells are exactly the same as the parent cell. And let's try vocabulary for 100. What does the word reproduce mean? We're talking about the two types of reproduction, but what does reproduce mean? Yes, reproduce means to make a new organism of the same species. Vocabulary for 200. What is pollen? Correct again. Pollen is a sticky powder found in flowers used to pollinate flowers. Vocabulary for 300. What do we call the female sex cell? Correct. We call it an egg. So now that we have reviewed sexual and asexual reproduction, the key points we want to remember is 1, asexual reproduction requires just one parent. An advantage of asexual reproduction is that it's usually pretty fast. But a disadvantage is because the parent and the offspring are identical to each other, they are more susceptible to disease because they have the same exact genetic makeup. So whatever kills the parent will most likely kill the offspring. On the other hand, sexual reproduction requires two parents. You get half your genes from your mom and half your genes from your dad. And because sexual reproduction requires two parents, the offspring look different from the parents. So an advantage of sexual reproduction is genetic variation, that diversity. So because the parents and the offspring are different from each other, if a disease kills the parent, it might not kill the offspring because they have different genes. And then a disadvantage of sexual reproduction is because it requires two parents, it takes time. You have to find a mate. So now that we have reviewed our two types of reproduction, let's move into this week's topic of genetics and heredity. So our focus for this session is TEK 7.14a. Students will be able to define heredity as the passage of genetic instructions from one generation to the next. So in this objective, we're talking about organisms who reproduce sexually and how they pass their genes on from one generation to the next. The essential question: how do you determine which trait expressed from an organism's genotype? Our agenda for today. The first thing we're going to do is fill in our heredity notes. And then we'll move on to practice with the Punnett Square so that we can know how to predict what will happen from one generation to the next. And then we'll do a little quiz and last but not least, get ready for that STAR test in May by practicing some STAR practice questions. So the materials you will need for today's session just include paper and pencil. And let's start off with, what is a trait? So a trait is everything that you see on your screen right now. They are passed from our parents to us. So examples of traits could be eye color, hair color, skin, and body shape. Genetics is the study of how traits are inherited from the inheritance of genes. So how traits come from genes. So what is a gene? So a gene is what controls what we look like. So the gene is the reason why you have black hair. It is the reason why you might be tall or short. It is the reason why you might have blue eyes or brown eyes. Genes are found in our chromosomes. We receive one gene from our parents. Eye color, for example, we get one from our mom and one from our dad. And based on the genes that we get from our mom and dad, that's what our eye color will be. The same thing from hair color. You might get one gene from your mom, you get another gene from your dad. When you combine those two genes, it'll express the color of your hair. So again, the thing we want to remember about genes, and again, we're talking about sexual reproduction, two parents, you get half from your mom and you get half from your dad. And when you take them and you put them together, it'll give you what you see about yourself. It'll tell you that, yes, when you combine your mom and dad's genes, it makes your hair brown. When you combine your mom and dad's genes, it makes your eyes blue. So inherited traits. Inherited traits are characteristics controlled by genes. So an inherited trait is something that you get from your parents. For example, curly hair is something you may get from your parents. Freckles, attached earlobes, or some allergies. So our genes will decide if our hair will be curly or straight. This information comes from your parents, half from your mom and half from your dad. Acquired traits, on the other hand, are characteristics that are learned from our environment. So we learn language. We dye our hair, our attitude. So now that we have a better idea about genetics and heredity, let's talk about the Punnett Square. So the Punnett Square is a diagram that is used to predict the outcome of a particular cross or breeding experiment. Basically, all that means is what's going to happen if we combine the genes of the mom to the genes of the dad? What will the offspring look like? So a Punnett Square will help us predict the possibilities of what the offspring can look like when we combine mom and dad's genes. So here's an example of a Punnett Square. As you can see at the top, we have dad's genes. And then on the side, we have mom's genes. And then they come together to give us the 4 possibilities of offspring genes. Now, as you can see, when we combine mom and dad, they might be the same or they might be different. So in this example, 2 offspring could be exactly like dad and 2 offspring could be exactly like mom. So again, remember genes. They tell us what we look like. They're inside our chromosomes. They tell us if we're going to have curly hair, blue eyes, long legs, brown hair. Now, those letters that we see on your screen, those are called alleles, and they come in pairs. So when you have alleles that are exactly the same, we call them homozygous. Capital B, capital B. They are exactly the same. We call them homozygous. When we have our lowercase b, again, homozygous because they're exactly the same. But if we have one capital B and one lowercase b, like a capital B from the mom, a lowercase b from the dad, we call that heterozygous. And it means that it is different. Now, genes can either be dominant or recessive. So recessive genes are overpowered by a dominant gene, and they are represented by a lowercase letter. On the other hand, a dominant gene overpowers all other genes, and they are represented by a capital letter. So all that means is that whenever we combine a dominant gene with a recessive gene, what we will see as far as the trait is whatever the dominant gene has. So for example, if the dominant gene represents blue eyes and the recessive gene represents brown eyes, when we combine it with a dominant A and a recessive A, this offspring will have blue eyes. It will have the gene of the dominant trait. Here's an example of homozygous. So capital B, mom, capital B, dad, and it combines and makes capital B's because that's all you have. So all of the offspring would have blue eyes just like mom and dad. Or if the recessive gene was brown, mom had brown eyes, dad had brown eyes. When you combine their genes together, you get offspring that only have brown eyes. But that's because mom and dad only had brown eye alleles. If mom had a different allele or dad have a different allele, we would see something a little bit different, which we're going to see on the next slide. So here's an example of a heterozygous Punnett square. So mom has the dominant gene of brown and dad has the recessive gene of blue. When we combine mom and dad, capital A, lowercase a, in all four boxes, although we combined mom and dad, we only see the dominant gene, which is brown, represented by that capital A. So now that we understand the Punnett square, let's practice on our own. So we're going to use gummy bears to practice our Punnett square, and each color we have, and also our alleles. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a red bear and cross it with a blue bear. Now, the first thing we need to do is write down the allele pairs for each gene. So we'll do red at the top. And from this second screen, we know that red is lowercase b, two recessive genes. So I'm going to put a lowercase b. And then on the other side, another lowercase b. And we're going to cross that with a blue bear. Now, if we go back to that original slide, blue bear has two dominant capital B's. So on the side, I'm going to put capital B, capital B. And now we're going to determine the pairs for each offspring. So we're just going to put the letters. So I'm going to put a capital B. And then I'll put capital B here. And then on this one, I have to use the lowercase b. And then again, another lowercase b. Now, this capital B went in this box. And then this lower capital B went in this box. This lowercase b went into both of these boxes. And we're going to do the same thing for the next one. So this capital B is going to go in the next box. And then the next capital B is going to go in the next box. So the capital B's go in both boxes across from it. And then the lowercase b's go in both boxes beneath it. So now I'm going to put a lowercase b and a lowercase b. So all of the offspring in this cross have the same allele pair. So we know, if we go back, they all have capital B, lowercase b. And if they have a capital B, lowercase b, what color do you think the bears will be? So if we go to here, it tells us that capital B, lowercase b would represent a purple bear. So we will have a purple bear here. One here. Here. And here. Now, again, we started with red and blue. Mom was red, dad was blue, but they made 4 purple offspring. Let's try that one more time. So this time we're going to cross a green parent and a yellow parent. So the allele pair for green is capital B, capital R, two dominant genes. So I'll put this capital B and then capital R. And we're going to cross that with the yellow bear. And the yellow bear is capital R, again, two dominant genes. And so we're going to cross them. So we have both our R's are going to go in the boxes across from them. So I'm going to start with this first R and place it in the two boxes across from it. Capital R, capital R. And now I'm going to go to this second R and place it in the two boxes across from it. And then I'm going to go to the top and place this capital B into the two boxes beneath it. So capital B, capital B. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this capital R at the top. I'm going to place it in the two boxes beneath it. And then again, one more time. So we started with a green parent and a yellow parent. Now let's see what type of offspring they made when we combined their genes. So we have two RBs and two RRs. So if we go back to our diagram, when we have two, the RR represents yellow. So we're going to have two yellow bears. And then our RB stands for RB or BR. It stands for green. So we are going to put the green here. So our green parent and our yellow parent made two green offspring and two yellow offspring. So this is an example of how genes are transferred from parents to one generation or another generation. Now, let's review what we did in a quiz is and practice a couple more Punnett Square genetics and heredity questions. So what type of traits are rare? So what type of traits is rare? Is it inherited, recessive, albino, or dominant? Yes, exactly. Traits that are rare are called recessive. The reason that what is the study of heredity called? So what have we been learning about all day? What is this session called today? Yes, this session is called genetics. If one parent has blue eyes and one parent has green eyes, the offspring will definitely have blue eyes. True or false? Yes, absolutely. That is false. Unless we know that blue eyes is dominant over green eyes, we really can't determine it. Green eyes might be dominant. And if green eyes is dominant, then of course we would have green eye offspring and not blue eye. So the answer is false. What tool can you use to help figure out the probability of a trait being dominant or recessive? So what did we just complete with our bears? Yes, if we want to predict what might happen to the offspring, we need to use a Punnett Square. The DNA sequence is referred to as, so what does our DNA look like? And we saw an image of that on one of our slides earlier today. Yes, DNA looks like a double helix. It kind of looks like a ladder, but the official term is double helix. Inherited traits can include chin, freckles, and color blindness. So can you inherit those traits from your parents? Absolutely. Your freckles come from your parents. Or the reason you do not have freckles is because your parents don't have freckles. What are personal characteristics called that have been passed on to offspring from parents, such as dimples or eye color? Right. Anything that we get from our parents is called an inherited trait. What is a set of instructions for an inherited trait? So what makes our eyes green? What makes our hair brown? What makes us tall or short? Right. That all comes down to our genes. Which characteristic is not inherited? So out of these four, which one do you not get from your parents? Absolutely. Out of the four, the only one that we do not get from our parents and instead we get from our environment is spoken language. So now that we have reviewed genetics and heredity a little bit more, let's end today's session practicing for the STAR test that will be coming up in May. So the question I have for you is the percentage resulting from this cross would be. So if we cross capital B, lowercase b with capital B, lowercase b, what percentage will we have of the different genes we might see? Right. We would obviously have more brown eye offspring than blue. So we need to find an answer choice that says that there'll be more brown eyes than blue eyes. And that would be choice number 1, 25% blue and 75% brown. And let's try one more question. The dominant trait as seen in this Punnett square is the dominant trait capital A or lowercase a? What type of letters represent dominant traits? Yes, dominant traits are represented by capital letters. So if a dominant trait is represented by a capital letter, then what type of peas would be part of the dominant traits? Yellow peas or green peas? Yes, the answer to this question is yellow pea seeds. Capital A, anytime you have capital letters, they represent dominant traits. And because the capital A is with the yellow peas, we know that yellow pea seed genes are dominant to green pea seeds. Well, that is everything that I have for you today. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.